That afternoon, in a peaceful little town, a notorious biker gang made the biggest mistake of their lives. They mocked, ridiculed, and even pushed over a woman in a wheelchair. To them, she was just a disabled veteran, an easy target. But they had no idea. Jessicandra Winters was not the frail woman they assumed. She was a covert operative, a highly trained warrior with a past no one dared to confront. What would happen when the predators realized they were the prey? Follow this story, because what happens next will leave you in disbelief. Before we dive in, comment on the city you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories. The story begins. She never imagined that a quiet afternoon at Mike's corner store would turn into a confrontation, exposing an entire criminal empire. But when 5 members of the infamous Red Dragons motorcycle gang decided to harass the woman in the wheelchair, they had no idea they were messing with one of the military's most dangerous combat experts. Jessicandra Winters had spent years concealing her true identity, hiding her abilities behind the guise of a disabled veteran. The wheelchair wasn't a lie. An IED explosion in Afghanistan had cost her her legs. But what these bikers didn't know was that she was currently an undercover FBI agent investigating their multimillion-dollar arms trafficking operation. They thought they saw weakness, they saw a target. They surrounded her like vultures, laughing, taunting, tipping her chair over, spilling her groceries. But when their leader, Ethan the Snake Wilson, put his hand on her shoulder, something snapped. In less than 30 seconds, 3 bikers were on the ground, 1 unconscious, and their leader was staring down the barrel of his own gun, now firmly in Jessica's hand. What happened next would shock the criminal underworld, as one woman's quest for justice would dismantle the largest weapons ring in the Pacific Northwest. Before we continue the story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoyed this story, hit the subscribe button, because tomorrow we have a special one for you. Twilight stretched across Main Street in Pine Valley, Montana. Jessica Winters wheeled her chair along the cracked sidewalk, her movements precise and measured. The familiar weight of her concealed Sig Sauer pressed against her lower back, hidden beneath her everyday jacket. 3 years in this chair had taught her adaptation, modifying every combat technique she'd learned in the military. The wheels weren't a weakness, they were just another tool. "Jessica, the usual?" Ashley's voice called from the cafe door. The young barista's smile was genuine, one of the few real connections Jessica allowed herself in this town. "Thanks, Jenny. Long day." Jessica navigated her chair through the entrance, automatically noting the exits, lines of sight, potential hiding spots, old habits hard to break. Her secure phone vibrated, Agent Blake's 3rd text of the day. The arms shipment they'd been tracking was about to arrive. The Red Dragons were getting sloppy, overconfident. That was why she was here, playing the part of a disabled veteran in a small Montana town. Nobody gave her a second glance, and that was exactly what made her dangerous. The cafe door jingled. Jessica's reflection in the window showed 3 men entering, leather jackets, Red Dragons insignia. Her heart rate remained steady as she sipped her coffee. This wasn't their first encounter, but something felt different today. The energy was off. "Well, look who it is." Ethan Wilson's voice echoed through the cafe. "Our favorite local hero." The gang leader's faux respect dripped with venom. 2 more dragons filed in behind him, spreading out in a familiar tactical pattern that made Jessica's combat instincts flare. "Evening, Ethan." She kept her tone neutral, her chair angled for a quick getaway. "Fresh coffee if you want some." Ethan stepped closer, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey and cigarettes. "You know, there's one thing I just can't figure." He leaned down, invading her space. "How someone like you is always around when we're doing business. It's almost like you're following us." The other patrons quietly left, leaving only Ashley behind the counter, her hand probably hovering over the silent alarm. Jessica could take down all 5 of these men. She'd run the scenarios 100 times, but it would blow her cover, wasting months of investigation. "I live here, Ethan," she shrugged, playing the part she'd perfected. "Small town, not a lot of places to go." Rick Razor Thompson, Ethan's right-hand man, snaked an arm around the back of her chair. Maybe we should help you find somewhere else to stay, sweetheart. Accidents happen to wheelchair folks all the time. Jessica's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the armrests. One swift move and she could dislocate Razor's knee. The modified Krav Maga techniques she developed worked perfectly from a seated position, but she held back, remembering Blake's words. The arms bust is all we need, the whole network. Ethan grabbed her chair handles, turning her to face him. You got 1 day to leave town. After that, he grinned, revealing a mouthful of gold teeth. Well, let's just say we know people at the VA. Benefit checks can get lost real easy. The old Jessica would have taken him down right there, but 3 years of undercover work had taught her patience. Sometimes you had to lose a battle to win the war. She let fear show in her eyes, just enough to be convincing. I understand. She looked down, hating the tremor she forced into her voice. Please, I don't want any trouble. Ethan straightened up, satisfied. Good girl. Boys, show her what trouble is. He nodded to Mike Crusher Davis, the gang's enforcer. Crusher grinned, reaching for Jessica's chair. In that instant, time seemed to slow down. Jessica saw everything with absolute clarity. Ashley reaching for her phone, Ethan's smug smile. The way Crusher's weight was shifted forward, making him vulnerable. She could end this in seconds. Instead, she forced herself to flinch as Crusher grabbed her chair and tilted it, sending her crashing to the floor. Coffee splattered on the tiles. The gang's laughter echoed off the walls as Jessica lay there, feigning helplessness, burning their faces into her memory. Each of them would pay, but not today. Today, she was building their confidence, letting them think they were untouchable. She'd learned in Afghanistan that the most dangerous predators were the patient ones. Whoops, Crusher chuckled. Looks like someone needs one of those "I've fallen and I can't get up" buttons. Jessica struggled to her feet, making it look difficult. Every instinct screamed at her to fight back, but the mission came first, always. As she finally hauled herself back into her chair, Ethan leaned down one last time. Remember, one day, after that, we won't be so nice. He righted her chair with mock politeness. Let's go, boys. Our friend needs to pack her things. The dragons swaggered out, leaving behind the stench of leather and menace. Only when their bikes roared away did Jessica let her mask slip a little. Ashley rushed over with a mop, her face flushed with anger. Jessica, I'm so sorry. I called Chief Anderson, he's on his way. Those bastards can't just keep. It's okay, Jenny. Jessica's voice was steady now, her eyes hard as she watched the bikes disappear around the corner. Everything is exactly as it needs to be. Her phone buzzed again. Blake, the arms shipment was confirmed for tomorrow night. The dragons had just made their biggest mistake, but they didn't know it yet. They thought they'd intimidated a helpless woman, when instead, they'd given her the perfect excuse to be anywhere in town, watching them under the guise of leaving. Jessica allowed herself a small smile as she dabbed at her clothes. Sometimes the best weapon was letting your enemy think they'd won. Night fell on Pine Valley as Jessica wheeled her chair into the small farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The modest house, carefully chosen for its clear sightlines and multiple escape routes, had been her base of operations for the past 3 years. She locked the door, ran her usual security checks, then finally allowed her shoulders to relax. The burner phone tucked into her seat cushion buzzed. Agent Blake's voice was tense when she answered. Tell me you didn't engage them. Calm down, David. I played my part perfectly. Jessica moved to her computer hidden behind a false wall. They did exactly what we expected, tried to run me out of town. The arms shipment is definitely coming tomorrow night. My sources say it's big, top-of-the-line military hardware, bound for a cartel buyer in Mexico. We can't afford any mistakes. Jessica's jaw tightened. They threatened to mess with my VA benefits, David. It was rich seeing their faces so proud of themselves for intimidating poor, helpless veteran Jessica. Blake's tone carried a warning. I know, mission first. She pulled up surveillance photos of the Dragon compound, but when this is over, I'm teaching them a few lessons. After ending the call, Jessica wheeled herself to her bedroom, expertly transferring herself onto the bed. Her legs, or what was left of them, throbbed with phantom pain, a reminder of that day in Afghanistan that changed everything. The memories flooded back, her team moving through the dusty streets of Kandahar, children playing nearby, the glint of metal catching her eye, a man triggering an IED in a window. She'd had a choice, fire from her position or run into the open to warn the children. It hadn't really been a choice. The blast had cost her her legs, but she'd saved 12 kids. The army had called her a hero, pinned medals on her, then they'd quietly approached her about a new mission. Her injuries made her the perfect undercover agent. Who would suspect a disabled veteran of being one of the FBI's top operators? A noise outside pulled her back to the present, footsteps on the gravel too deliberate to be casual. Jessica reached for her gun, then heard a familiar whistle. "Ashley brought you some dinner," the cafe owner said as Jessica opened the door. She wheeled inside quickly, locking the door behind her. "The dragons haven't changed their plans," Ashley continued, setting down a bag of food. "Ethan was bragging at the bar about a big delivery going down at the old lumber mill around midnight tomorrow." Jessica nodded. Ashley had been her eyes and ears in town from the start, one of the few people who knew her true identity. "You're taking a big risk helping me like this. Those bastards killed my brother 2 years ago. Bad batch of drugs they pushed. The cops called it an overdose, but I know better." Ashley's eyes hardened. Besides, someone needs to stand up to them. As they ate, Jessica's mind ran through the scenarios. The lumber mill had too many access points to cover with standard FBI teams, but if the dragons thought she'd left town, they'd be less cautious. She could use that. "I need you to do something for me tomorrow," Jessica said finally, "something that'll look strange." Ashley leaned forward. "Name it." "I need you to help me spread the rumor that I'm leaving town, make it convincing. Pack a few boxes into your truck, make a show of me moving out, a distraction." Jessica smiled. "They'll be watching. We need them confident, off guard. When they see me loading up, they'll think they've won." Later that night, after Ashley left, Jessica transferred back into her wheelchair and moved to the hidden compartment behind it. Next to her computer hung a modified tactical vest she'd spent months customizing. Her combat gear, designed to work from a seated position, every strap, every pouch placed for maximum efficiency. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Blake, "Teams in position by 2300 hours tomorrow. Do not engage early." Jessica texted back a simple acknowledgement, then began to prepare. She checked her weapons, reviewed the blueprints of the lumber mill, and ran through her modified combat drills. The dragons had no idea that every insult, every threat from today had only made her more dangerous. When you lose your legs, you learn that true strength isn't about standing tall, it's about knowing when to appear weak. She wheeled herself to the window, gazing at the stars over the Montana mountains. Tomorrow would change everything. Either she would take down one of the largest weapons trafficking operations in the country, or she would blow her 3 years of undercover work. And if things went sideways, her wheelchair wouldn't be an excuse, it would be her coffin. The phantom pain returned stronger this time. Jessica closed her eyes, remembering the hospital after the explosion. The doctors had told her she would never serve again, never run, never fight. They didn't understand that taking away her legs only made her more determined. The dragons had made the same mistake today, assuming her disability made her weak. Her phone lit up with another message, this time from an unknown number. A photo appeared, Jessica at the cafe today on the ground after Crusher flipped her chair. The caption read, "Tomorrow is your last chance." Jessica smiled grimly in the darkness. The dragons thought they were the hunters, but they had no idea what was hunting them. Tomorrow, they would learn that the most dangerous predator was the one they never saw coming. She began her final equipment check. Every piece of gear was modified, tested, perfected. Her wheelchair itself was a weapon, reinforced frame, hidden compartments, custom modifications turning it from a medical device into a combat platform. Everyone who looked at her saw weakness, they never noticed the warrior hiding in plain sight. The night grew late as Jessica mentally prepared. Tomorrow would require perfect timing, absolute control. One mistake and the entire operation would fall apart, but she'd been training for this moment since the day she woke up in that hospital bed. The dragons thought they'd scared her into running, when instead they'd given her exactly what she needed, an excuse to be anywhere in town watching their every move. As she finally settled into bed, Jessica thought about Jenny's brother, about all the lives the dragons had ruined with their operation. Tomorrow wasn't just about the arms bust, it was about justice, about showing that sometimes the most dangerous adversary was the one they overlooked. She set her alarm, knowing that in 24 hours everything would change. The dragons were about to learn a lesson about underestimating their enemies, and Jessica Winters, the disabled veteran they'd mocked, would be their teacher. Dawn broke over Pine Valley with a blood-red sky. Jessica watched the sunrise from her porch, sipping black coffee as she observed Ethan's two men trying to be inconspicuous while surveilling her house. They'd been there since 5 a.m., parked in a blue pickup truck, thinking they were invisible. Amateurs. Her secure tablet displayed the latest intel from Blake. The arms shipment was big enough to equip a small army, RPGs, modified assault rifles, even prototype military hardware that wasn't supposed to exist outside of classified facilities. The question that had haunted her for months remained: how were the Dragons getting this kind of equipment? The burner phone rang. "Jessica, we have movement." Ashley's voice was a whisper. Ethan just had a meet with someone at the diner. Dressed sharp, definitely not local. They passed something under the table. Description: over 50, military bearing, expensive watch. Seemed very interested in the lumber mill delivery, called Ethan's son a few times. Jessica's mind raced. The missing piece of the puzzle was starting to form. "Jenny, I need you to get the coffee brewing. Our plan starts now." An hour later, Jessica wheeled herself down Main Street, making sure the Dragon surveillance team got a clear view. She'd loaded 2 large boxes onto her lap, making a show of struggling with them. Just then, Ashley pulled up in her pickup truck, the bed piled high with belongings. "Last trip," Jessica called out loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I can't believe you're really leaving." "No choice," Jessica projected defeat into her voice. "Can't stay where I'm not wanted." They played their parts perfectly, the concerned friend helping the threatened veteran pack up and leave town. Jessica caught glimpses of phones being used, texts being sent. The Dragons had bought it, spreading the word that they'd successfully run her out of town. By noon, half the town had heard about her departure. Jessica wheeled herself into the cafe one last time, maintaining her defeated posture. The diner was unusually crowded. It seemed everyone wanted to say goodbye to the disabled veteran who had become a familiar sight over the past 3 years. Chief Anderson approached her table, coffee mug in hand. He was one of the few who knew her true identity, the essential backup for what was about to happen. "I hear you're leaving town," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, then much quieter. "Teams are in position." The Coast Guard intercepted the decoy shipment they sent north. Jessica nodded subtly, keeping her defeated expression in place. "Sometimes you just know when you're not wanted anymore, Chief." The bell jingled as Ethan and Razor entered. Their timing was too perfect to be coincidental. They wanted to see their victory firsthand. Jessica felt Razor's eyes on her, watching for any sign that this was a setup. She gave him what he wanted, a flinch, a quick glance, her hands trembling slightly on the wheels. Ethan approached, clearly enjoying himself. "Moving day, huh? Smart choice." He leaned down, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But just to make sure you don't get lost on your way out." He slipped a phone into her lap. "Keep it on you, we'll be checking in." A tracking device. Jessica had anticipated something like this. "Please." She let her voice crack. "I'll be gone, just like you wanted." "Of course you will." Ethan straightened up, grinning. "Boys, help the lady with her things. Make sure she takes everything." Crusher and Tommy Ghost Parker appeared at her side, their offers of help carrying clear threats. They followed her and Ashley back to the house, watching as they loaded the last boxes. Jessica had prepared for this, making sure they saw exactly what she wanted them to see. Clothes, photos, personal items, all carefully staged. As dusk turned to night, Jessica made one last appearance on Main Street. The Dragon surveillance team had relaxed, confident in their victory. She'd seen Ethan check the tracking phone twice, watching her red dot move exactly as expected. What they didn't know was that the phone was now attached to Jenny's truck, heading north on the highway. Meanwhile, Jessica's real operation was about to begin. Back at her house, she activated the hidden panel, revealing her tactical gear. The lumber mill security cameras, hacked months ago, showed increased activity, trucks moving in and out, the Dragons preparing for their midnight delivery. They were so focused on watching her leave town, they never noticed the careful positioning of the FBI teams, the subtle movement of local police into strategic locations. Her secure phone lit up with a message from Blake. "Confirmation on your mystery man. Robert Jackson, former Army colonel, discharged from service 3 years ago after an investigation into missing weapons. Never formally charged." The pieces clicked into place. Jackson was their source, a bitter ex-military officer with access codes and connections, using the Dragons as his distribution network. His appearance today wasn't a coincidence. He was overseeing the largest shipment yet. Jessica began her final preparations. The modified tactical vest slipped on smoothly, every piece of gear exactly where she needed it. Her wheelchair, stripped of its civilian disguise, now revealed its true nature. Reinforced frame, puncture-proof tires, hidden compartments holding enough firepower to take down a small army. The sun was setting as she ran through her mental checklist one last time. The dragons thought she was running, not running. Fear was miles away on the highway north. Instead, she was about to become their worst nightmare. Her phone buzzed, a text from Ethan to the tracking phone. "Keep driving, sweetheart. Don't stop until you reach Canada." Jessica smiled in the growing darkness. The dragons had spent all day watching her leave without ever realizing they were the ones being watched. In a few hours, their empire would crumble, and they would learn too late that sometimes the most dangerous predator was the one they overlooked. The real operation was about to begin. Darkness enveloped the lumber mill like a shroud. Jessica positioned herself in the shadows of an abandoned office building. Her wheelchair was utterly silent on the gravel thanks to its special modifications. Through her night vision binoculars, she counted 12 dragons patrolling the perimeter, all armed with military-grade weapons. They'd beefed up their security tonight. Jackson's influence was unmistakable. "I have eyes on the main entrance," she whispered into her secure comm. "Multiple tangos with heavy weapons. They're expecting trouble." Blake's voice crackled in her ear. "Jackson just arrived. Black SUV, diplomatic plates. He's not even trying to hide it anymore." Jessica watched Jackson emerge from his vehicle, his military bearing evident even at this distance. He moved like a man who had never lost his command presence, inspecting the dragon setup with clear displeasure. Ethan trailed behind him, trying to look important. "Shipment's late." Jackson's voice came through clearly in Jessica's directional microphone. "Your men better not screw this up. The buyer isn't known for their patience." "Relax, old man," Ethan replied, lighting a cigarette. "Ghost is escorting them in personally. 20 minutes max." Jessica's mind raced. Ghost wasn't at the mill, which meant the real shipment was coming from a different direction. The convoy they were all watching was a decoy. "Blake," she whispered, "check the back roads near Miller's Creek. Ghost will use the old logging trails." A moment later, "Damn it, you're right. Thermal imaging shows 3 trucks moving through the woods. They're bypassing all our checkpoints." Jessica smiled grimly. The dragons weren't entirely amateur, but their clever route had a fatal flaw. It would force them to cross the open ground between the tree line and the mill's loading docks. Perfect. She began to move, her wheelchair utterly silent as she repositioned. Years of training had taught her how to use the terrain to her advantage, and her lower profile in the chair actually helped her concealment. The dragons were all looking for threats at standing height. No one thought to check the ground. A new voice crackled over her comm. "Agent Winters. This is Bravo Team. We have movement at North End Range. For SUVs. Cartel plates, the buyers." Jessica acknowledged. "As expected. Hold position until my signal." Jackson was getting agitated, constantly checking his watch. "Where's Ghost? The buyers are here." "Patience, old-timer," Ethan sneered, emphasizing the rank Jackson no longer held. "Not everything runs on military time." Jessica could see the anger flash across Jackson's face. Interesting, there was tension between them. She filed that away as something that might be useful. The first rumble of engines echoed from the woods. Ghost's convoy was exactly where she'd predicted. 3 black trucks ghosted through the darkness, using the terrain for cover. They'd planned this well, but they hadn't planned for her. "All units hold position," she whispered. "Wait for my signal." The next few minutes were critical. The buyers were coming from the north, Ghost's convoy from the south. Jackson and Ethan stood exposed in the middle, waiting to oversee the exchange. One wrong move and they'd all scatter. Jessica watched through her scope as Ghost's trucks emerged from the tree line. The lead truck's headlights flashed twice, a signal. The buyers' SUVs responded with flashes of their own. The trap was about to close, but not the one the dragons had planned. "Command, I'm moving to position 2, Jessica whispered. rolling silently through the shadows. Her chair's custom suspension handled the rough terrain perfectly, keeping her steady as she positioned herself behind a stack of lumber. Now she could see everything. The buyers approaching cautiously, Ghost's convoy rolling in from the rear, Jackson and Ethan in the middle of it all. The pieces were in place. Years of planning, months of undercover work, all came down to this moment. "Ma'am, we have a new voice on the comm. We have a problem. A second group of buyers is approaching from the east, not part of the plan." Jessica's blood ran cold. A second group meant this wasn't just a sale, it was an auction. The dragons were playing both sides, driving up the price by making the buyers compete. It was clever, but it also meant twice the number of armed enemies about to converge on their position. "Blake," she whispered, "we need to move now. If those groups meet, this is going to turn into a shooting gallery." "Negative," Blake replied. "We don't have containment on the second group. Hold position." Jessica watched as the situation grew more volatile. The first buyer group had spotted the second, and hands were moving to weapons. Jackson was yelling at Ethan, who had drawn his own gun. Ghost's convoy had stopped, caught in the middle. Then she saw it, the slight nod between Jackson and the second buyer group. This wasn't just a botched auction, it was a double cross. Jackson was playing everyone. "Blake, Jackson is working with the second group. This is about to get hot." Before Blake could respond, Jackson drew his weapon and pointed it at Ethan's head. "You really think I needed your thugs?" he snarled. "You were just delivery boys. My real partners are here now." The lumber mill erupted in chaos. The first buyer group opened fire, thinking they'd been set up. Ghost's convoy drivers scrambled for cover. Ethan's men started shooting at anything that moved. Jessica remained perfectly still, her military training taking over. Let them fight each other. Let them thin out their own numbers. The real trap wasn't the FBI surrounding them. It was the firefight they were creating themselves. Through her scope, she watched Jackson retreat from the firefight, moving towards a side exit. He wasn't surprised by the chaos. This was his plan all along. Let the gangs kill each other, take the weapons, and disappear in the confusion. "Blake," she whispered, "Jackson is moving." Requesting permission to engage. There was a long pause filled with the sounds of gunfire. Finally, Blake's voice came through. "Do what you have to do, just survive." Jessica smiled grimly, unlocking her chair's hidden compartments. It was time to show them what a disabled veteran was truly capable of. The lumber mill had become a war zone. Sparks flew in the night as the three different groups exchanged fire, their gunshots echoing off the metal buildings. Jessica moved through the chaos like a phantom, her chair's dark coating blending into the shadows. Jackson was heading for the east exit, thinking he'd created the perfect diversion. He was wrong. Jessica positioned herself behind a forklift, watching Jackson's route. He moved like the soldier he once was, keeping low, using cover, but he made one critical mistake. He was looking for threats at eye level. No one ever thought to check the ground. Bravo team maintained suppressing fire on the main group. She whispered into her comm, "Keep them pinned down. I'm going after Jackson." A bullet pinged off the forklift above her head. The first buyer group was spraying bullets everywhere, concerned with quantity over accuracy. Amateur move, they'd run out of ammo soon. Jackson was 30 meters away, moving between shipping containers. Jessica made a quick calculation: trajectory, wind speed, distance. Her modified sniper rifle was perfectly balanced for firing from a seated position. The dragons thought she was running, not running. Fear was miles away on the highway north. Instead, she was about to become their worst nightmare. Her phone buzzed, a text from Ethan to the tracking phone: "Keep driving, sweetheart. Don't stop until you reach Canada." Jessica smiled in the growing darkness. The dragons had spent all day watching her leave without ever realizing they were the ones being watched. In a few hours, their empire would crumble, and they would learn too late that sometimes the most dangerous predator was the one they overlooked. The real operation was about to begin. Darkness enveloped the lumber mill like a shroud. Jessica positioned herself in the shadows of an abandoned office building. Her wheelchair was utterly silent on the gravel thanks to its special modifications. Through her night vision binoculars, she counted 12 dragons patrolling the perimeter, all armed with military-grade weapons. They beefed up their security tonight. Jackson's influence was unmistakable. "I have eyes on the main entrance," she whispered into her secure comm, "multiple tangos with heavy weapons. They're expecting trouble." Blake's voice crackled in her ear. Jackson just arrived, black SUV, diplomatic plates. He's not even trying to hide it anymore. Jessica watched Jackson emerge from his vehicle, his military bearing evident even at this distance. He moved like a man who had never lost his command presence, inspecting the dragon setup with clear displeasure. Ethan trailed behind him, trying to look important. Shipment's late, Jackson's voice came through clearly in Jessica's directional microphone. Your men better not screw this up. The buyer isn't known for their patience. Relax, old-timer, Ethan replied, lighting a cigarette. Not everything runs on military time. Jessica could see the anger flash across Jackson's face. Interesting, there was tension between them. She filed it away as something that might be useful. The first rumble of engines echoed from the woods. Ghost's convoy was exactly where she'd predicted. 3 black trucks ghosted through the darkness, using the terrain for cover. They'd planned this well, but they hadn't planned for her. All units hold position, she whispered. Wait for my signal. The next few minutes were critical. The buyers were coming from the north, Ghost's convoy from the south. Jackson and Ethan stood exposed in the middle, waiting to oversee the exchange. One wrong move and they'd all scatter. Jessica watched through her scope as Ghost's trucks emerged from the tree line. The dragons thought she was running, not running. Fear was miles away on the highway north. Instead, she was about to become their worst nightmare. Her phone buzzed, a text from Ethan to the tracking phone. Keep driving, sweetheart. Don't stop until you reach Canada. Jessica smiled in the growing darkness. The dragons had spent all day watching her leave without ever realizing they were the ones being watched. In a few hours, their empire would crumble and they would learn too late that sometimes the most dangerous predator was the one they overlooked. The real operation was about to begin. Darkness enveloped the lumber mill like a shroud. Jessica positioned herself in the shadows of an abandoned office building. Her wheelchair was utterly silent on the gravel thanks to its special modifications. Through her night vision binoculars, she counted 12 dragons patrolling the perimeter, all armed with military-grade weapons. They beefed up their security tonight. Jackson's influence was unmistakable. I have eyes on the main entrance, she whispered into her secure comm, multiple tangos with heavy weapons. They're expecting trouble. Blake's voice crackled in her ear. Jackson just arrived, black SUV, diplomatic plates. He's not even trying to hide it anymore. Jessica watched Jackson emerge from his vehicle, his military bearing evident even at this distance. He moved like a man who had never lost his command presence, inspecting the dragon setup with clear displeasure. Ethan trailed behind him, trying to look important. Shipment's late, Jackson's voice came through clearly in Jessica's directional microphone. Your men better not screw this up. The buyer isn't known for their patience. Relax, old-timer, Ethan replied, lighting a cigarette. Not everything runs on military time. Jessica could see the anger flash across Jackson's face. Interesting, there was tension between them. She filed it away as something that might be useful. The first rumble of engines echoed from the woods. Ghost's convoy was exactly where she'd predicted. 3 black trucks ghosted through the darkness, using the terrain for cover. They'd planned this well, but they hadn't planned for her. All units hold position, she whispered. Wait for my signal. The next few minutes were critical. The buyers were coming from the north, Ghost's convoy from the south. Jackson and Ethan stood exposed in the middle, waiting to oversee the exchange. One wrong move and they'd all scatter. Jessica watched through her scope as Ghost's trucks emerged from the tree line. The bullets ricocheted off the metal walls. Jessica watched through her tactical display as they wasted ammunition into the darkness. 3 years of planning had turned this lumber mill into her personal battleground. Bad choice, she muttered, activating the next phase. The sprinkler system engaged, but instead of water, a specially designed incapacitating mist poured down. The fog filled the air, disorienting the buyers, their shots going wild as the drug took effect. Within seconds, half of them were on their knees. Control, south area is contained, Jessica reported, moving to her next position. How's the situation at the main firefight? Blake's response was strained. Ethan has rallied some of his men, they have Ghost's weapons convoy and they're trying to break through the east perimeter. Jessica smiled grimly. Not for long. She rolled silently through the warehouse, taking a route parallel to Ethan's group. Her chair's custom suspension handled the debris-strewn floor with ease, keeping her steady as she moved into position. Through gaps between the crates, she could see Ethan leading 6 dragons towards the east gate. They were dragging crates of weapons, moving as fast as they could while carrying the heavy load. Ethan's shoulder was bleeding from her earlier shot, but rage and adrenaline kept him going. This is impossible, he yelled. One fed in a wheelchair, she can't be doing all this. Boss, we need to ditch the crates, one of his men panted. We're too slow. Touch those crates and I'll kill you. Ethan's voice was desperate. This is our ticket to the big leagues. Jessica pressed her comm key. Blake, I have eyes on Ethan, moving to intercept. Be careful, Winters, he's cornered and desperate. Jessica positioned herself at the end of the line, calculating angles. Her wheelchair gave her an advantage they hadn't considered. She could fire from beneath the storage racks through gaps they'd never think to check. The first dragon went down with a shot to the leg, yelping in surprise. The second took a bullet to the shoulder before they even realized where the fire was coming from. Down! Ethan yelled, finally dropping his crate. Find her! Jessica had already moved, flanking them. The silent motor of her chair gave her perfect mobility while they crashed around like bulls in a china shop. She took them down one by one, non-lethal shots just like she'd been trained. Ethan was the last one standing, spinning around trying to locate her. Show yourself, he roared. Face me like a real fighter. Fine. Her voice came from behind him. As he turned, Jessica's wheelchair burst through a stack of empty crates. Before he could raise his weapon, she was on him. Her first strike hit his wrist, sending his gun flying. The second, a modified leg sweep she'd perfected, took out his legs. Ethan crashed to the ground hard, staring at her in disbelief. How did you? Jessica's next strike silenced him. A precise blow to the jaw she'd practiced countless times. I'm the one who just took down your entire operation, she said calmly, locking his wrists. And I did it all without standing up. Agent Winters. Blake's voice was urgent. We have a problem, Jackson escaped. Jessica's head snapped up. How? He had help. One of the guards was on his payroll. They're heading to the north loading dock. Jessica quickly tied Ethan to a support beam. Not for long, this ends tonight. She moved through the warehouse with renewed purpose. Jackson was the key to everything. The weapon source, the military connections, the corrupt officials on his payroll. They needed him alive and talking. The north loading dock was the highest point of the mill, overlooking the entire complex. As she approached, she could hear the whir of helicopter blades in the distance. Jackson had an escape plan. Blake, I need backup at the north dock, she called. And someone get me intel on that chopper. But as she reached the dock entrance, something was wrong. The gate was wide open, but no guards were visible. Jackson was too good a soldier to leave himself this exposed. It was a trap, and Jessica was running right into it. The first bullet hit her armored seat back, proving her paranoia correct. Jackson had set up a kill zone, expecting her to rush in, but he'd made one critical mistake. He still thought she needed the chair to fight. Jessica smiled in the darkness. It was time to show them what a disabled veteran was truly capable of. The helicopter's headlights swept across the loading dock, creating harsh shadows. Jackson had positioned his remaining men well, 3 shooters with clear lines of sight covering every obvious approach. But Jessica hadn't survived Afghanistan by being predictable. Blake, radio silence unless it's urgent, she whispered. I'm going dark. She detached her chair's spare battery pack, a custom device that looked harmless but contained enough explosive power to breach a steel door. Years of being underestimated had taught her how to weaponize anything people assumed was a medical device. The first guard never saw it coming. The battery pack sailed through the air, detonating against the wall behind him. The blast wasn't lethal, but the concussive force and the shower of debris sent him crashing down. More importantly, it drew everyone's attention upwards, exactly where Jessica wasn't. She'd already moved, sliding out of her chair into a practiced combat crawl. Her upper body strength, developed over years of adaptation, allowed her to move silently across the concrete floor. Jackson's men were still staring at the blast site, never thinking to look down. Where is she? One of them hissed. She has to be in that chair. Jessica allowed herself a grim smile as she pulled herself behind a shipping container. Everyone's assumptions about disability were always the same: weakness. The chair wasn't her prison. It was just one of many tools. Jackson's voice echoed from above. Find her. That chopper is our only way out. The headlights swept back and forth, creating shifting shadows that Jessica used for cover. She reached into a hidden pouch in her tactical vest, pulling out 3 small devices that looked like gaming dice. Another custom design, EMP generators disguised as medical equipment. The first one rolled under the helicopter, its magnetic surface clicking softly against the landing strut. The second and third followed different paths, positioning themselves around the loading dock's power distribution box. "Boss, we need to go." One of Jackson's men was getting nervous. "The feds are closing in." "Not without those weapon manifests," Jackson growled. "That's our insurance policy, and not without taking down that federal." Jessica triggered the EMPs. The loading dock plunged into darkness as the power went out. The helicopter's electronics sputtered and died, its rotors slowing with a groan. In the ensuing chaos, Jessica moved. She hauled herself onto a raised platform, using the height advantage. The first guard was 3 feet away, his night vision goggles blinding him in the sudden darkness. Jessica's strike to his carotid artery was precise. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. The second guard turned towards the sound, but Jessica had already moved. She used his own momentum against him, a technique she'd modified from her Marine Corps hand-to-hand combat training. From the ground, she could target knees and ankles with devastating efficiency. He crashed down hard. "It's a trap." The third guard's panic was evident. "She's not in the chair. She's..." His warning was cut off as Jessica's garrote wire snagged him across the chest, pulling him down to her level. A swift strike to the temple ended his resistance. Jackson's voice cut through the darkness. "Impressive, Agent Winters, using your disability as a tactical advantage, but you're wrong. This is my trap." Lights suddenly blazed on from hidden positions. Jessica found herself caught in multiple spotlights, temporarily blinded as her eyes adjusted. She saw Jackson standing on the loading dock's upper level, holding a tablet. "Find this," he waved the tablet. "Every weapons shipment, every buyer, every corrupt official, all the evidence you've spent 3 years gathering. Encrypted, of course, the password dies with me." Jessica kept low, analyzing angles and distances. "You really think that tablet is your way out? The entire mill is surrounded." Jackson laughed. "You still don't get it, do you? Why do you think I let you track this operation for 3 years? Why do you think we let you get so close?" A chill ran down Jessica's spine as the implications hit her. "You knew. You knew all along?" "Of course we knew. You think you're the first agent they've sent? But you were perfect." The disabled veteran so desperate to prove herself. "Every move you made, every piece of evidence you gathered, all went exactly where we wanted." Jessica's mind raced. 3 years of investigation, all the evidence stored on secure servers. Servers that other people had access to. "Your boss, Agent Blake." Jackson's smile was cruel. "He's been working for us from the start. Right now, he's wiping every server, erasing every connection. By dawn, none of this will exist." The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder, but they weren't FBI trucks. The engines were wrong. More of Jackson's men. "So you see, Agent Winters, your greatest weakness isn't your disability. It's your faith in the system, the very system that sent you to Afghanistan, that took your legs, that made you think you could make a difference." Jessica's hands clenched into fists. Everything she'd worked for, every piece of evidence, every sacrifice, all part of someone else's game. But Jackson had made one critical mistake. He thought this revelation would break her. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly, reaching for her last hidden weapon. "The system failed me. That's why I stopped believing in it 2 years ago." Jackson's smile faltered. "Blake wasn't the only one playing both sides. Every piece of evidence I sent him, a copy went somewhere else. Someone even you can't touch." Now it was Jessica's turn to smile. "You really think a disabled veteran would trust the system that betrayed her without a backup plan?" The real operation was about to begin. Jackson's smug grin vanished as his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his face darkening. "What did you do?" Jessica spoke calmly, remaining in her ground position. "Check your secure servers." Jackson's fingers flew across his phone, his expression growing more desperate with each swipe. "No way. These are military-grade firewalls, and I've had 3 years to crack them. Everything you've done, every weapon you've sold, every official you've bribed. It's all being uploaded to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency in the country right now. A new sound cut through the night, more helicopters approaching at high speed. Not Jackson's reinforcements. These were military choppers. Those aren't FBI helicopters, Jessica continued. Those are the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Remember them, Colonel? Your old unit. They're very interested in where their missing weapons ended up. Jackson's face contorted with rage. Blake, get me a secure line to Blake now. He couldn't help him. Jessica pulled herself behind a shipping container as Jackson's men began to move nervously. He's probably been arrested already. You see, Agent Winters, your greatest weakness isn't your disability, it's your trust in the system, the very system that sent you to Afghanistan, that took your legs, that made you think you could make a difference. Jessica's hands clenched into fists. Everything she'd worked for, every piece of evidence, every sacrifice, all part of someone else's game. But Jackson had made one critical mistake. He thought this revelation would break her. You're right about one thing, she said quietly, reaching for her last hidden weapon. The system failed me. That's why I stopped believing in it 2 years ago. Jackson's smile faltered. Blake wasn't the only one playing both sides. Every piece of evidence I sent him, a copy went somewhere else, someone even you can't touch. Now it was Jessica's turn to smile. You really think a disabled veteran would trust the system that betrayed her without a backup plan? The real operation was about to begin. Jackson's smug grin vanished as his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his face darkening. What did you do? Jessica spoke calmly, remaining in her ground position. Check your secure servers. Jackson's fingers flew across his phone, his expression growing more desperate with each swipe. No way, these are military-grade firewalls and I've had 3 years to crack them. Everything you've done, every weapon you've sold, every official you've bribed, it's all being uploaded to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency in the country right now. A new sound cut through the night, more helicopters approaching at high speed. Not Jackson's reinforcements. These were military choppers. Those aren't FBI helicopters, Jessica continued. Those are the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Remember them, Colonel? Your old unit. They're very interested in where their missing weapons ended up. Jackson's face contorted with rage. Blake, get me a secure line to Blake now. He couldn't help him. Jessica pulled herself behind a shipping container as Jackson's men began to move nervously. He's probably been arrested already. You see, while you were watching me feed information to Blake, I was working with someone else, someone who's been hunting you longer than I have. The tablet in Jackson's hand beeped. His eyes widened as he read the message, Director Lin, you're working with internal affairs. Jessica smiled grimly. For 2 years, every piece of evidence I gathered went to 2 places, Blake's compromised servers and Lin's secure servers. You were too busy watching the disabled agent to ever notice the real investigation. Jackson's last threads of control snapped. Kill her. Kill her now. His remaining men opened fire, but Jessica had already moved. She'd spent months memorizing every inch of this loading dock, practicing moves most people wouldn't think possible without legs. She moved from cover to cover, using her lower profile to her advantage. 3 years of pretending to be weak, she called out, drawing their fire. 3 years of letting you think I was just a disabled veteran. Want to know the truth? She triggered her final surprise, remote detonated charges placed throughout the loading dock. Not explosives, but industrial magnets salvaged from the lumber mill's equipment. They activated with a powerful thwomp, and suddenly every weapon with metal components was yanked towards the walls. The truth is I never needed the chair to fight. I chose it because no one ever looks twice at someone they think is helpless. The loading dock had become a killing zone, but not the one Jackson had intended. His men's weapons were useless, yanked away by the magnetic force they couldn't overcome, and Jessica was a ghost among them, striking from below using their own height against them. Director Lin has been building a case against you for years, she explained, taking down another guard with a precise strike to the knee. But he couldn't get close. Then I came along, the perfect cover. Who would suspect the disabled veteran? Jackson was frantically tapping on his tablet, trying to stop the data upload. I can still delete everything. No, you can't. Jessica's voice was closer now. That tablet hasn't been connected to your real servers for months. It was just for show, just like everything about your operation. The sound of approaching vehicles was getting louder, but they weren't FBI trucks. The engines were wrong. More of Jackson's men. You see, while you were watching me feed information to Blake, I was working with someone else, someone who's been hunting you longer than I have. The tablet in Jackson's hand beeped. His eyes widened as he read the message, "Director Lin, you're working with internal affairs." Jessica smiled grimly. "For 2 years, every piece of evidence I gathered went to 2 places, Blake's compromised servers and Lin's secure servers. You were too busy watching the disabled agent to ever notice the real investigation." Jackson's last threads of control snapped. "Kill her. Kill her now." His remaining men opened fire, but Jessica had already moved. She'd spent months memorizing every inch of this loading dock, practicing moves most people wouldn't think possible without legs. She moved from cover to cover, using her lower profile to her advantage. 3 years of pretending to be weak, she called out, drawing their fire. 3 years of letting you think I was just a disabled veteran. Want to know the truth? She triggered her final surprise, remote detonated charges placed throughout the loading dock. Not explosives, but industrial magnets salvaged from the lumber mill's equipment. They activated with a powerful thwomp, and suddenly every weapon with metal components was yanked towards the walls. The truth is I never needed the chair to fight. I chose it because no one ever looks twice at someone they think is helpless. The loading dock had become a killing zone, but not the one Jackson had intended. His men's weapons were useless, yanked away by the magnetic force they couldn't overcome, and Jessica was a ghost among them, striking from below using their own height against them. "Director Lin has been building a case against you for years," she explained, taking down another guard with a precise strike to the knee. "But he couldn't get close. Then I came along, the perfect cover. Who would suspect the disabled veteran?" Jackson was frantically tapping on his tablet, trying to stop the data upload. "I can still delete everything." "No, you can't." Jessica's voice was closer now. "That tablet hasn't been connected to your real servers for months. It was just for show, just like everything about your operation." The military helicopters were directly overhead, their searchlights illuminating the area. Armed figures rappelled down ropes. "You see, Agent Winters, your greatest weakness isn't your disability, it's your faith in the system, the very system that sent you to Afghanistan, that took your legs, that made you think you could make a difference." Jessica's hands clenched into fists. Everything she'd worked for, every piece of evidence, every sacrifice, all part of someone else's game. But Jackson had made one critical mistake. He thought this revelation would break her. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly, reaching for her last hidden weapon. "The system failed me. That's why I stopped believing in it 2 years ago." Jackson's smile faltered. Blake wasn't the only one playing both sides. Every piece of evidence I sent him, a copy went somewhere else, someone even you can't touch. Now it was Jessica's turn to smile. "You really think a disabled veteran would trust the system that betrayed her without a backup plan?" The real operation was about to begin. Jackson's smug grin vanished as his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his face darkening. "What did you do?" Jessica spoke calmly, remaining in her ground position. "Check your secure servers." Jackson's fingers flew across his phone, his expression growing more desperate with each swipe. "No way, these are military-grade firewalls and I've had 3 years to crack them. Everything you've done, every weapon you've sold, every official you've bribed, it's all being uploaded to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency in the country right now." A new sound cut through the night, more helicopters approaching at high speed. Not Jackson's reinforcements. These were military choppers. "Those aren't FBI helicopters," Jessica continued. "Those are the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Remember them, Colonel? Your old unit. They're very interested in where their missing weapons ended up." Jackson's face contorted with rage. "Blake! Get me a secure line to Blake now." He couldn't help him. Jessica pulled herself behind a shipping container as Jackson's men began to move nervously. "He's probably been arrested already." Military helicopters thundered overhead as Jessica rolled into the secure briefing room at Fort Harrison. General Richardson, commander of Special Operations Command, stood before a wall of screens displaying real-time data from raids across the country. His face was grim as satellite footage showed more weapons caches being uncovered. 48 hours since the Jackson takedown, he announced to the assembled task force, "We've seized over $2 billion in illegal weapons, but that's not why I called this meeting." He nodded to his aide who distributed sealed folders. "Open them." Jessica's blood ran cold as she reviewed the contents. Surveillance photos showed heavily armed men entering safe houses across Europe and Asia. "Jackson's contingency plan," she said quietly. "He has sleeper cells." "Exactly, Agent Winters." Marshall pointed to a map displaying red dots spreading like a virus. "The moment we hit the lumber mill, these cells activated. They're not just arms dealers. They're mercenaries, former military trained by Jackson himself. How many? At least 200 that we know of. All armed with stolen weapons and classified technology acquired over the years, and they have one primary target. He met Jessica's gaze. You. The room fell silent. Jessica continued to read the intel, her face unreadable. Jackson's network was bigger than anyone imagined. The lumber mill operation wasn't just about weapons, it was a test watching how she operated. There's more, Marshall continued. Jackson talked. There's another player involved, someone even he feared. A former CIA operative codenamed the Engineer. Director Lin leaned forward. Do we have an ID on the Engineer? Negative, but we found this in Jackson's personal files. A new image appeared on the screen. A burned-out village in Afghanistan. Jessica recognized it instantly. Her hands gripped the wheelchair armrests until her knuckles were white. That's where I lost my legs, she said quietly. The IED explosion wasn't random. No, it wasn't, Marshall confirmed. The Engineer arranged it. They knew you were getting close to Jackson's operation at the time. The blast was meant to kill you, Agent Winters. When it failed, you became an obsession for them. For 3 years you were undercover, they were watching, learning. Jessica's mind raced. Every interaction with the dragons, every move was carefully planned. She thought she was the hunter. Instead, someone had been studying her techniques, her adaptations, her fighting style. A base analyst rushed into the room. Sir, we have multiple breaches. Someone is hacking our secure servers. The screens flickered and died across the room. When they reactivated, a single message appeared. You think Jackson was the final target, Jessicandra? Alarms blared across the base. We have hostiles inbound, someone yelled. Multiple armed contacts breaching the perimeter. Get Agent Winters to the secure bunker, Marshall ordered. But Jessica had already moved, her wheelchair whirring as she sped towards the door. With all due respect, General, that's exactly what they want, she said. They're playing us. This isn't an attack, it's a demonstration. As if to confirm her words, the attackers never breached the building, disappearing as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving only a tablet displaying more surveillance photos. Jessica in Pine Valley, Jessica at the lumber mill, Jessica taking down Jackson's men. They're a step ahead, Lynn realized. The Jackson takedown, the weapons seizure. It was all part of their plan. Not quite, Jessica replied, studying the photos. They made the same mistake Jackson did. They think the wheelchair makes me predictable. She turned to Richardson. General, I need everything you have on CIA Black Ops in Afghanistan from 5 years ago. Every operative, every mission. That's beyond classified. Agent Winters. So is the prototype weapon technology they stole. Technology that I bet wasn't just lying around in Jackson's warehouse. She fixed Marshall with a steady gaze. Someone inside military intelligence was feeding them information. Someone high up. The general's face hardened as the implications sank in. Too many people with access to classified files. Too many opportunities for corruption. How do we find such a high-level leak? Lynn asked. We don't, Jessica replied. We let them find us. She rolled to the central console, bringing up a map of known weapons caches. The Engineer wants to prove they're smarter than us. Fine. Let's give them a game they can't resist. She started marking locations, creating a trail. These sites are too obvious. The Engineer will assume we'll hit them first, so we leak the operation plan. Let them think they know our play. And while they're watching those sites, Marshall slowly nodded. We hit where they least expect. Jessica pulled up a different map, hidden facilities not even Jackson knew about. The Engineer has a god complex. They want to prove they can outsmart a disabled AG operative who dared challenge their operation. So let's use that. The plan was audacious, dangerous. If they were wrong about the Engineer's psychology, it would fail spectacularly, but Jessica had spent 3 years being underestimated. She knew how to use assumptions against her enemies. General, she said quietly, I need you to trust me even when it looks like I've gone rogue. Richardson studied her for a long moment. The Engineer has people inside military intelligence, inside the FBI, maybe inside this very room. You're asking me to risk everything on a hunch. I'm asking you to risk everything because the engineer is building an army. The weapons they stole, they're not for sale, they're for something bigger. The general slowly nodded. Do it? But Agent Winters. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. Be careful. The engineer not only failed to kill you in Afghanistan, they turned you into the perfect weapon. A disabled veteran everyone underestimates. Don't let them finish what they started. Jessica offered a grim smile as she rolled towards the door. They won't see me coming. No one ever does. The next phase was about to begin. And this time Jessica wasn't just hunting arms dealers. She was hunting the person who took her legs. The person who'd spent 3 years studying her every move. What do we know about the engineer's psychological profile? Jessica studied the classified files spread across the secure terminal, her wheelchair positioned at a custom height desk in the FBI Mobile Command Center outside Pine Valley. The town had become a ghost town as residents stayed indoors, terrified by the military presence. Former CIA specialist in psychological operations, Lynn replied, handing over heavily redacted documents. Specializes in breaking down enemy command structures from the inside. They don't just destroy organizations, they redesign them, like they're doing with Jackson's network. Turning a weapons trafficking operation into a private military force, Jessica mused. A new alert flashed on the screen. Another weapons cache had been discovered, this time in a residential neighborhood in California. But something was off about the timing. They're playing with us, Jessica said, rolling to another terminal. Every cache we find is perfectly staged, documented. They want us cataloging weapons while they move their real assets. Her secure phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. You're learning, Jessicandra, but not fast enough. Seconds later, explosions rocked military bases across 3 states. Not devastating blasts, but precise strikes targeting weapons storage facilities. As the alerts poured in, Jessica recognized the pattern. They're destroying evidence, she realized. Every facility we've marked for investigation, they're cleaning house. Lynn's face paled as he checked his tablet. We've lost contact with the transport carrying Jackson. GPS shows it stopped on a mountain road in Idaho. Jessica was already moving, her wheelchair whirring as she headed for the door. Get me a chopper now. Jessica, wait. Lynn called after her. This is exactly what they want. Isolate you. Draw you out. Because I'm tired of playing defense. Jessica checked her chair's hidden compartments, verifying her weapons were secure. 20 minutes later, she was in a Blackhawk soaring over dense forest towards Jackson's last known location. The transport's GPS signal wasn't moving, which meant an ambush or something worse. 5 minutes to target, the pilot announced. Ma'am, are you sure about this? We have gunship support on standby. No backup, Jessica replied, checking her tactical vest. The engineer has too many eyes on official channels. This needs to look real. The transport came into view, stopped on a narrow mountain road, its escort vehicles still in formation, no sign of fighting, no bodies, just silence. Drop me 50 meters out, Jessica ordered, then stay clear. Whatever happens next, maintain radio silence. She rolled down the loading ramp onto the rough terrain, her chair's enhanced suspension handling the uneven ground. The modified controls allowed her to move silently, staying in the shadows as she approached the transport. The back door was wide open. Inside, Jackson sat calmly in his restraints, smiling as if he'd been expecting her. Hello, Jessicandra, he said softly. She said you'd come alone. Where is she? The engineer is closer than you think. She's been watching you for years, you know, learning from you, how you adapted after losing your legs, the combat techniques you developed. You became her case study in human evolution. Jessica's hand moved closer to her concealed sidearm. She planted the IED, of course, but not to kill you, to transform you. She needed someone special, someone who could demonstrate the true potential of tactical adaptation. Jackson leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. Why do you think she let you investigate me for 3 years? You weren't hunting us, Jessicandra, you were teaching us. A twig snapped in the woods. Jessica spun her chair around, drawing her weapon in one fluid motion, but the darkness remained empty. She's not here, Jackson continued. This is just another lesson, another test to see how you'll adapt. Jackson nodded towards a tablet lying on the transport's floor. Take a look. The screen displayed live feeds from military bases across the globe. At each base, soldiers were discovering their weapons had been replaced with perfect replicas, non-functional decoys swapped out over months or years. The real weapons have already been distributed, Jackson said softly, to sleeper cells in every major city. The engineer doesn't want to sell weapons, Jessicandra, she wants to demonstrate how vulnerable the system really is, and you helped her do it. Jessica's mind raced. Every weapons cache they'd seized, every database they'd compromised, all carefully staged. The engineer hadn't just been watching her work, she'd been using Jessica's investigation as a cover for her real operation. Why are you telling me this? Jackson smiled. Because she wants you to understand what's coming, the chaos, the collapse of military command structures. It's all part of the evolution she sees in you. The weak systems collapse and something stronger emerges. A new message flashed on the tablet. Ready for your next lesson, Jessicandra? Suddenly, the transport's engine roared to life. The doors began to close automatically as the vehicle started to move. Jackson's smile widened. Better move fast, he called out. You have about 3 minutes before the charges detonate, just enough time to save me or stop whatever's really happening on the other side of the mountain. Jessica's chair sensors detected multiple heat signatures converging through the trees. The engineer's forces moving into position, but for what? She had to make a choice, and somewhere in the shadows, her real enemy was watching, learning, adapting. The game was changing, and this time Jessica wasn't sure if being underestimated was an advantage or part of someone else's plan. Jessica's mind calculated trajectories and probabilities in the split second after Jackson's revelation. The transport was accelerating down the mountain road, the charges were primed behind her. The heat signatures were moving through the trees, the engineer's forces closing in, and somewhere on the other side of the mountain something worse was happening. She made her decision. Jackson's dead anyway, she muttered, spinning her chair towards the woods. Her tactical display showed 15 enemies moving in coordinated patterns. Their formation was familiar, she would have used similar approaches in her undercover work. They're using my own tactics against me, she realized. The engineer hadn't just studied her methods, she trained her forces to think like Jessica. The engine of her chair whirred as she accelerated through the undergrowth using terrain features she would normally avoid. They'd expect her to follow the most accessible routes just like she had for the past 3 years while maintaining her cover. It was time to show them what her chair was really capable of. The first attacker never saw her coming. Jessica emerged from a gully that should have been impossible to navigate. Her modified wheelchair handled the terrain like a tactical vehicle. A precise shot to his knee brought him down instantly. Contact, someone yelled. She's in the woods. But Jessica had already moved, using the chair's low profile to slip between cover points they'd never consider. Her combat adaptations developed over years of dealing with her disability went beyond standard tactical responses. The engineer's forces were fighting a ghost. Echo Team, no visual. Delta, she's not using the trails. How is she moving through this terrain? 3 more attackers fell with precise, non-lethal but debilitating shots. Jessica wasn't just fighting, she was sending a message. The engineer wanted to learn from her methods. This was a masterclass. Her tactical display showed the remaining forces regrouping, adjusting their pattern. They were learning, adapting in real time, just like she did. Jessica's secure phone buzzed, a message from the engineer, impressive improvisation, but you're letting Jackson escape. The transport was almost out of sight, turning onto a mountain road. Jessica probably had 90 seconds before the charges detonated. You're not as clever as you think, Jessica typed back. Check your thermal imaging. She'd placed a device on the transport during her brief interaction, a micro-EMP designed to fry electronic detonators. The charges were dead. Jackson wasn't going anywhere. The response was immediate. Impressive, but while you're playing chess, I'm changing the board. Suddenly, Jessica's tactical display lit up with new signatures, dozens of them moving through the woods, not towards her but towards something on the other side of the mountain. The satellite feed accessed her chair's computer, the image making her blood run cold, a hidden airfield carved into the mountainside. Inside, 3 cargo planes were being loaded with what looked like missile components. The manifests flashing on her screen told the story, pieces of a weapons system that shouldn't exist, something that could bypass any defense network on Earth. Now you see the real game, the engineer's message continued. Jackson was a distraction. The lumber mill, the weapons caches, even your 3 years undercover, all designed to keep everyone from seeing this. Jessica's mind raced. The engineer hadn't just built a private army, she'd created a complete secret military infrastructure using Jessica's investigation as a cover. Every time law enforcement focused on a weapons bust, the engineer's real operation grew stronger. Blake's giving us a location. Lynn's voice came through her secure comm, the engineer's command center, some kind of converted missile bunker in the Bitterroot Mountains. It's a trap, Jessica replied, still tracking the hostile movements on her display. She wants us to commit resources there while her real operation deploys. So what's the plan? Jessica studied the satellite feed, noting the patterns in the loading process. Something was off about how they were distributing the weight unless the missiles were decoys, she realized. Look at the loading, they're not balancing them correctly for actual launches. This is another deception. She zoomed in on the cargo bays, enhancing specific sections. Those containers aren't weapon components, they're servers. Quantum computing cores. The engineer's ultimate goal was clear. This wasn't about arms trafficking or private armies, it was about creating a shadow intelligence network, something that could hack and control any military system in the world. She's not trying to start a war, Jessica said to Lynn, she's making sure she can control both sides when it happens. Her chair sensors detected new movement. The hostile forces were retreating, disappearing into the woods as quickly as they'd appeared. The engineer was letting her see the bigger picture, knowing it was almost too late to stop it. Almost. Lynn, I need everything we have on quantum computing facilities in the region, power consumption records, cooling system purchases, anything unusual in the past 3 years. Already on it, but Jessica, there's one other thing we found, records of the engineer's activities in the CIA, the village in Afghanistan where you lost your legs. There's more to that story. Jessica's hands tightened on her chair controls. Tell me, the IED explosion wasn't just to take you out of action. The explosion had a very specific blast pattern. It was designed to inflict exactly the damage it did, no more, no less. She wanted me in this chair, Jessica said quietly. Everything since then, my recovery, my adaptations, the new combat techniques I've developed, she wasn't just her case study, Lynn confirmed, she was her prototype, the new kind of operative she's creating. There are others, Jessica, other disabled veterans being watched, tested, studied. The engineer is building an army unlike anything we've ever seen. Jessica looked at the mountain road where Jackson's transport had disappeared, at the secret airfield being loaded with its mysterious cargo, at the forest where forces trained in her own tactics had tested her reactions. She thought she was the hunter, using everyone's assumptions about her disability to her advantage, but someone had been running a much longer game. The real question was what she was going to do about it. The mobile command center buzzed with activity as Jessica studied the data streaming across multiple screens, power consumption patterns, satellite thermal images, shipping logs, all pointing to something hidden in plain sight. 3 locations, she announced, marking points on the digital map, all showing energy signatures consistent with quantum computers, but they're too obvious. The engineer wants us to find them. Lynn leaned closer, reviewing the data. Decoys, testing sites. She's watching how we analyze intelligence, how we plan operations. Jessica rolled to another terminal, pulling up personnel files. But look at this, each facility is staffed almost entirely by disabled veterans, specially recruited, specially trained. The implications were staggering. The engineer hadn't just been studying Jessica's adaptations, she was replicating them on a massive scale, creating an entire force of operatives everyone would underestimate. Latest news from Jackson's transport, a young agent reported. We found it abandoned 20 miles up the mountain, no charges, no Jackson, but they did find this. He handed Jessica a small data drive. Its label bore a single word, evolution. Careful, Lynn cautioned as Jessica moved to plug it in. Could be infected. She wants me to see this, Jessica replied, connecting the drive to a secure system. The files were encrypted, but her specialized interface cracked them in minutes. What she found made her blood run cold. Research files, medical data, combat footage, all documenting the engineer's work with disabled veterans, but it went deeper than training. There were designs for advanced prosthetics, neural interfaces, combat systems designed specifically for operatives with different disabilities. She's not just building an army, Jessica realized, she's creating the next stage of military evolution using disability as an advantage, turning perceived weaknesses into tactical strengths. A new video file auto-opened. The timestamp showed it was from Afghanistan 5 years ago. Jessica recognized the village where she lost her legs, but this angle was different, a drone view she'd never seen before. The footage showed her younger self moving through the streets with her team, then the perfectly timed IED explosion. The blast pattern was precise, surgical. It wasn't random, Jessica said quietly. Every detail, from the type of explosive to the placement, she designed it specifically for me to create exactly this result. The video continued, showing something else, other soldiers in similar situations, different missions, different locations, but the same exact objective. Each injury was calculated, each disability designed for maximum adaptive potential. How many? She asked Lin. We've identified 47 so far, all disabled veterans, all recruited into specialized programs after their injuries, and that's just the ones we know about, Lin confirmed. She's been playing a much longer game than anyone realized. Everything I've done in Pine Valley, every technique I've developed. I've been helping her perfect the process. Her secure phone buzzed, another message from the engineer. Now you understand. You're not just my prototype, Jessicandra, you're my masterpiece. Before Jessica could reply, alerts flashed on every screen. The quantum computing facilities were powering up simultaneously. Something big is starting. Multiple cyber attacks detected and analysts called out. Military networks around the world are being compromised. But the patterns are familiar, they're using my infiltration techniques, Jessica confirmed, watching the data streams. Everything I developed for undercover work, adapted for digital warfare. The attacks are elegant, precise, just like the IED that took my legs. Each breach targets specific vulnerabilities, using methods that seem obvious in hindsight, but took Jessica years to perfect. We need to shut them down, Lin insisted, hit all 3 facilities at once. No, Jessica said firmly. That's exactly what she wants. These attacks aren't the real threat, they're another test. She's watching how we react, learning from our defensive patterns. She rolled to the central console, her mind racing. The engineer had spent years studying her adaptations, learning how she turned disadvantages into advantages. Now it was time to use that against her. Get me a direct line to the Pentagon Cyber Command, Jessica ordered, and find every disabled veteran who's been recruited into specialized programs in the past 5 years. It was time to show the engineer she wasn't the only one who could adapt. Her phone buzzed again. Make your move, Jessicandra. Remember, I taught you everything you know about turning weakness into strength. Jessica offered a grim smile as she typed her reply. No, you taught me everything you know, but I learned a few things on my own. She turned to Lin, get our people into position, but this time we do it my way. No tactical teams, no special forces. I want the disabled veterans we vetted, the ones we trust, the ones who understand what it means to adapt. You're building your own army, Lin realized. No, I'm assembling people who've learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes what looks like a weakness is actually strength. The engineer thinks she can control evolution. Let's show her what real adaptation looks like. As the orders went out and the operations deployed, Jessica studied the quantum facility data once more. The engineer had spent years watching her, learning from her methods. Now it was time to show the teacher exactly what her star pupil had really learned. The real evolution was about to begin. Quantum facility breach in progress, the tactical display announced as Jessica rolled through the darkened server room. Her hand-picked team, 12 disabled veterans, each chosen for their unique adaptations, moved silently through the complex. Every one of them had been approached by the engineer's recruiters. Every one of them had recognized something wrong about the offer. Team 2 in position, Taylor Lin's voice came over the comm, the former Air Force pilot who'd lost both arms in an accident, but her neural interface allowed her to control surveillance drones with uncanny precision, detecting multiple heat signatures in the main server core. Copy that. Jessica checked her tactical display. The facility's layout was a mirror image of her own combat adaptations, hallways sized for wheelchair maneuverability, access points at seated height. The engineer had built this place using everything she'd learned from studying Jessica. It was time to show her the lessons she hadn't finished. Ethan, lead, Jessica ordered. The former Marine who'd lost his hearing in an explosion, but his other senses had become incredibly acute. He moved ahead, feeling vibrations through his prosthetics, able to detect approaching enemies before any sensor. The first resistance came exactly where Jessica expected, a security team using her own flanking tactics. But she'd spent years developing those methods, learning their weaknesses. Madison, she whispered into the comm. The former Army sniper who'd lost her right arm emerged from her wheelchair like a coiled spring. Her prosthetic leg, devoid of cosmetic covering, revealed a custom shooting brace. 3 precise shots took down the security team before they could react. They're copying your old techniques, Madison observed as they secured the hallway, but they don't understand the adaptation behind them. The engineer thinks disability is something to engineer, Jessica replied, checking the fallen guards. As expected, all were able-bodied operatives trying to mimic methods developed out of necessity. She doesn't realize true adaptation comes from within. Her chair sensors detected a power surge in the servers ahead. The quantum systems were ramping up, preparing for something big. Jessica, Lynn's voice came over her secure comm. We found the engineer's ultimate target. Those systems aren't just for cyber warfare, they're running evolutionary algorithms analyzing combat data from disabled veterans around the world. She's not building an army, she's trying to force the next step in human military evolution by creating more people like us. Not exactly, Jessica realized, watching the data streams. By turning disability into an advantage, each injury, each adaptation she's engineered, they're experiments. She's trying to prove that the traditional military is obsolete. Her phone buzzed with a new message. Very good, Jessicandra, but you've only seen part of the picture. Come to the main control room, see what real evolution looks like. The message included an image that made Jessica's heart stop. Ashley from the coffee shop in Pine Valley strapped to some kind of medical device, sensors covering her body, feeding data to the quantum systems. The next phase needs volunteers, the engineer's message continued. Your friend was kind enough to assist. 30 minutes until the procedure begins, choose wisely. Jessica's hands tightened on her chair controls. Sarah, get me the building schematics, find me a route to that control room they won't expect. They've covered all the obvious approaches, Taylor reported, her drones mapping security positions. Anything big enough for your chair is being monitored. Jessica offered a grim smile. Who said I needed my chair? She began detaching components from her tactical wheelchair, weapons, sensors, medical supplies. Her team watched in confusion until understanding dawned. You're going to show them what real adaptation looks like, Madison said quietly. The engineer has spent years studying how I fight from this chair, Jessica explained, checking her gear. She's built this entire facility on those assumptions, but she's forgotten one crucial thing. What's that? I wasn't born in this chair. I learned how to fight long before Afghanistan, and sometimes. She pulled herself out of the wheelchair, her upper body strength evident as she moved with practiced efficiency. Sometimes the best way to adapt is to change the rules completely. Ethan grinned as he helped distribute her equipment. They'll never expect you to come from below using the maintenance shafts and ventilation ducts. Exactly, Madison agreed. Sarah, you're my eyes up top. Stand by for my signal. When I reach the control room, hit every server node at once. The engineer wants to force evolution, let's show her what real survivors can do. As her team moved into position, Jessica began her approach. Years of developing alternative movement techniques served her now as she moved through spaces too small for any tactical team. The engineer had built her security system around defending against wheelchair-bound operatives. She hadn't considered that true adaptation meant being able to leave the chair behind. Your friend is quite brave, the engineer's voice suddenly echoed through the corridor. She told me about Pine Valley, about watching you feign helplessness all those years. She understands what we're trying to achieve. You're trying to play God, Jessica replied, knowing the engineer could hear her, creating disabilities, forcing adaptation, but real evolution doesn't work that way. Doesn't it? Look at yourself, Jessicandra. Everything you've become, every advancement you've made all started with the IED I gave you, that gift. No, Jessica pulled herself around a corner, nearing the control room. You took something from me. What I became after that was my choice, my evolution. She could see Ashley through a ventilation grate. The medical device looked like something out of a nightmare, its purpose all too clear. You're going to do it to her, Jessica realized, just like you did to me, to all of us. I will elevate her, the engineer corrected, just like I elevated you. The next stage of human military development requires sacrifice. Jessica reached for her comm, ready to signal her team, but something stopped her. The engineer's voice held something familiar, too familiar. You're one of us, she said quietly. That's how you knew where to place the IED, you've been through it. The ensuing silence confirmed everything. The engineer hadn't just been studying disabled veterans, she was one of them. And now Jessica knew exactly how to stop her. Hello, Jessicandra, the engineer's voice came from directly ahead. As Jessica pulled herself into the control room through the maintenance shaft, I wondered if you'd figure it out. The woman standing beside Ashley's restraining table wasn't what anyone would expect. Colonel Rebecca Harris, legendary Delta Force operative, presumed dead in action a decade ago. Her uniform sleeve hung empty where her right arm should have been, and a sleek prosthetic leg gleamed beneath her trousers. The mission that cost you your arm and leg, Jessica said, positioning herself behind a console. It wasn't an accident. Very good, Rebecca smiled. I designed it, just like I designed your injury. Every loss was precisely calculated, every adaptation carefully monitored, a perfect crucible for evolution. You were the test case, Jessica realized. You did it to yourself first. I proved the concept. Traditional military thinking makes us weak, dependent on perfect bodies and conventional tactics, but true strength, Rebecca flexed her prosthetic fingers, true strength comes from overcoming loss. From turning weakness into power by crippling the innocent, creating an army of disabled veterans by forcing human evolution. Rebecca's voice rose with fervent intensity. Every subject I chose, every injury I designed, all proving my theory. You proved it better than anyone, Jessicandra. 3 years in Pine Valley, letting everyone underestimate you, developing combat techniques no able-bodied operative could match. Jessica's team was in position. She could see their signals on her tactical display. One word would trigger their attack on the facility's servers, but she needed to understand why. Why now? Because it's time for the next phase, Rebecca moved to the medical controls. Individual evolution isn't enough. We need to prove this is the future of warfare. Imagine entire special forces units, each operative carefully modified for maximum adaptability. No more waiting for combat injuries to create warriors like us. We engineer them, we perfect them, we evolve them. You're insane. I'm inevitable. The quantum systems have proven it. Every simulation shows the same result. Disabled operatives consistently outperform traditional forces. We adapt faster, think differently, find solutions no one else sees. The only thing holding us back is the belief that we're broken. Ashley's restraints suddenly released, but instead of fleeing, she stood up, moving to Rebecca's side. I'm sorry, Jessica, Ashley said quietly, but she's right. I've been watching you for 3 years, seeing how you turned your disability into strength. I want that power. I choose this evolution. Jessica's heart sank as she understood. Ashley hadn't been captured, she'd been recruited, convinced by Rebecca's twisted logic that deliberate disability was the path to human advancement. The quantum systems don't just run simulations, Rebecca continued, they identify the optimal candidates, calculate the perfect adaptations. Ashley's procedure will be designed for maximum potential, just like yours was. You really think I'm your success story? Jessica pulled herself to her feet, using the console for leverage, facing them directly. That the IED that took my legs somehow made me stronger? Look at what you've become, all you've achieved. I became this in spite of you, not because of you. Jessica's voice broke with emotion. You didn't give me strength by taking my legs, you only forced me to find the strength I already had. That's what you'll never understand about evolution. It doesn't come from the outside, it comes from within. She pressed her comm button now. The facility rocked in chaos as Jessica's team launched their simultaneous attack. The servers crashed, power fluctuated, and the quantum systems began to fail, but Rebecca only smiled. You think I didn't plan for this? Every tactic you're using, every strategy one taught you, it's all because I created you. No, Jessica's voice was calm. You didn't create me, you only made one critical mistake. What's that? You assumed the wheelchair was my weakness, just like everyone always has. But here's the truth, I never needed it to beat you. Jessica moved with explosive speed, techniques honed in secret for years. Rebecca's prosthetic arm lashed out as she countered, but she'd been trained to fight wheelchair-bound opponents. She wasn't prepared for Jessica's ground-based fighting style. The fight was brutal, efficient. 2 disabled veterans each adapted to their limitations, but with vastly different philosophies. Rebecca fought to prove her theories about engineered evolution. Jessica fought to prove that true strength came from choice, not force. In the end, it wasn't technology or tactical advantage that decided the battle, but understanding. Rebecca had spent so long trying to perfect human evolution that she'd forgotten its most fundamental principle: adaptation comes from need, not design. As Rebecca lay subdued, her prosthetic limb deactivated, she looked up at Jessica with something like awe. How? I calculated everything. Everything was planned for every contingency. That's exactly why you failed. Jessica secured her restraints. Real evolution isn't following a plan, it's finding your own way. Ashley stood nearby, shaking, Rebecca's influence fading as reality set in. Jessica, I'm so sorry. I believed her, she made it sound perfect. I know, Jessica's voice was gentle, because sometimes it's easier to believe someone else has the answers than to find them yourself. The facility was secure. Jessica's team of disabled veterans had proven that true adaptation came in many forms. As federal agents swarmed the complex, Jessica looked at the quantum computers that had tried to reduce human evolution to mathematical formulas. You know what real evolution is? She asked Rebecca as the agents led her away. It's not becoming stronger through injury, it's discovering that strength was there all along. You just have to choose to find it. Hours later, as the sun rose over the mountains, Jessica sat in her wheelchair, watching the cleanup crews dismantle the engineer's operation. Ashley approached hesitantly. How did you know? She asked. That I was working with her? Because you stopped seeing me as weak, Jessica offered a sad smile. The real me, not the undercover persona. You started seeing disability as an advantage, just like she did, but that was never the point. What was the point? Disability doesn't make us stronger or weaker, it's just part of who we are. Strength comes from how we choose to live with it. The helicopter arrived to transport Rebecca to a secure facility. Jessica thought about evolution, true evolution, not the engineered perfection Rebecca had sought, but the messy, unpredictable journey of becoming who you were meant to be. Her wheelchair wasn't her advantage or her weakness, it was simply part of her path, and she had chosen how to walk it one adaptation at a time. This story isn't just about strength or revenge, but a lesson in patience, intelligence, and turning disadvantages into strengths. Have you ever been underestimated but ended up surprising everyone with your abilities? Share your thoughts in the comments, your story might inspire someone. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to share it with friends and family to spread the valuable lessons about inner strength and resilience. Thank you for following along. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more exciting and emotional stories. Remember, in life, things aren't always as they seem, and sometimes the weakest person is the most dangerous. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe for the latest updates. These stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared for the purpose of spreading human values and life and have been rewritten with the help of AI. If there are any mistakes, please forgive them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.